Welcome. I hope you enjoyed the film today. And I think the way we're going to try to manage this is without me looking very good, because Harry's not here to make me beautiful. But I'm on my own in the den with a little camera and a laptop. So if you've seen Switch On, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a big adventure and really quite meaningful. I hope you feel that. The way we're going to try to do this is I'll answer questions. You'll live chat them in, and then I'll speak. And I won't be able to see you respond, and I don't know if there are 2 or 20 of you, but maybe there are 200. Anyway, so anytime we want to get started, happy to have somebody type something in, and we will carry on. Well, hi. On this Thursday evening, we are all adapting to life in remote land, including me, here in my den. And like a complete geo nerd, I've got maps behind me. But what better, what better thing to have, I guess. I hope you enjoyed the film. Those of you who were able to watch Switch On. It was a big project, and Harry and I started this adventure together a decade ago. Harry Lynch, he's the director and producer of these things, and I'm the ever-aging pretty face. And so we have carried on with the first film, Switch, and looking at global energy, which I hope you've had a chance to see on our website. And then a few years ago, we got together and said, you know, we really missed something. We missed a big part of the world that doesn't have much energy or any energy at all. So we decided to make this film, Switch On, and went to many countries. You saw them in the film, and had quite an adventure, but a pretty meaningful one too. This is a different film than Switch. It's emotional, it's human, and it's a real story. It tells about some of the impacts in the world today without energy. And we're seeing those play out, ironically, in very real time right now with the COVID-19 challenge and global crisis, and what happens when energy goes away. So I'm here to answer questions, spend 45 minutes with you, and I see they're streaming in now online. So let me just start at the top. I won't read your name to protect you. I'm a university professor. We're not allowed to reveal names. But first one, is there an opportunity for development of natural resources in these countries that can also be utilized for energy sources? Absolutely. And that's going to vary, of course, by country and by resource. We filmed in 5 countries. And in Vietnam, you see them developing their coal resource. They've already developed their hydro resource. There's no more topography and to make dams. And they aren't going to cut down that jungle in a 1,000-mile long north to south country to put up solar and wind. So coal, they have the resource, and it's a way to make affordable, available, reliable electricity for Vietnam. And that powers up their sectors across the board in terms of manufacturing and other sectors, and that's really growing their economy. So although coal has big challenges, particularly environmentally, it's lighting up that part of the world. Other parts that we visited, certainly the hydro and the solar resources in Kenya and Ethiopia are very big. They also have natural gas in that region that they could bring in as a baseload source of fuel. As you come up to Nepal, yes, it's a small country. It's right there at the juncture of India and China and other surrounded, but there are resources they can bring in besides coal and wood and biomass and dung. And certainly in Latin America, South America, and Colombia, big oil and gas resources, as well as hydro and other kinds. So these things are needed, these environmental challenges of each form of energy, all of them. But energy is needed to lift these countries up from where they are, and the people in them develop an economy which allows them then to invest in the environment. Some more questions, lots. Well done movie, thank you. So I won't read your names, but glad we got to be the first and second films, absolutely, and I am too. And Margot, who helped put this together, and the sponsors, thank you for this. You've been very patient for a long time. I'm just sorry we couldn't be there in the theater together. Question, for these 1+ billion people, it looks like there are many adaptations to provide energy. Very true. And a portfolio of energy matters. That's in the modern developed world as well as the emerging and developing world. One form of energy limits you like it does in any portfolio. So a mix of things, different fuels and different sources for electricity is a good thing. Optionality matters across the space. You have to have electricity that's always on as you grow the economy. So distributed renewables, that's the only way to get electricity to some of the more indigenous villages that we visited, and there are many in the world. But as they start to grow that economy then and need more, then you bring in always on or baseload kinds of things, natural gas, coal in some places, nuclear in other places, and hydro. So these all come together and I think matter as you start to lift again these economies up. More coming in here. I did not see much on wind. What are your thoughts there versus solar for at least the microgrids? That's very true. It's an interesting story. When we went to Colombia the first time and you saw us interacting in Gunchukwa and across the Arhuaco people around the Sierra Nevada, they invited us to bring only solar. There's a river that runs through there, and you saw me crossing it. We could put pico hydro in. No, the waters are sacred. We talked about micro wind and micro wind turbines. No, there were issues there. PV solar, that was it. And so culturally, that's what they would accept. Certainly in places with steady wind, wind is another great option for these off-grid and then emerging economies. You could see that as a nice initial form of electricity. Again, the challenge with wind or solar or other forms of intermittent energy is you have to back them up with something because you want the lights on, metaphorically and actually the power on. You saw me when we were in the hospital in Nepal, and in modern hospital, CD Memorial Hospital, we were plugging into that plug and it wouldn't work. The electricity wasn't working for the respirator. It's just welcome to a big part of the world. So that's one of the great challenges, is making sure we can balance these different forms together and provide the growing demand that will exist. Here's another question. How much did the project cost, and what was the power rating, the voltage? I'm not sure which project. The whole film project itself, we raise money. These are a small crew we take out with us. We don't stay in the nicest places. It's not bad, but it's not Hollywood. So we produce films for a very affordable price that can play on an IMAX. This is shown on an IMAX actually down in Houston in the museum, Houston Museum of Science as a premiere event. It will show in London and Denver Museum and other places. So it has that quality, but we can do this for a remarkably affordable price. If you're talking more specifically about some of the projects like a Conchuqua, That install was expensive. It was to bring the people and all the equipment that we paid for, most of, except some of the things that were donated. But all the people were volunteer. We had to move them around and get it there and then deploy in the week. It's about $100,000 project. My wife and I, Allison, we bought the battery stack that you saw, the big, beautiful lead acid battery. $15,000 was our contribution to that project. 3.5 kilowatts. That's about half what you would put on a typical home here in the United States to power those 7 mud huts with the thatched roofs, lights, ceiling fans in the community center, and the refrigerator freezer. So it's very expensive. The further off grid you get, the more. Now, that said, some of the things you saw with the solar pumps in Africa, the 40, 80, 120 watt single panels putting on the indigenous people in Kenya and Ethiopia and across Africa, the Maasai people, those are relatively affordable, certainly in our standards. And because they can get credit and pay for that with cell technology, it's a monthly payment and you begin to establish credit, which has never been possible in most of these communities. It's just it's an amazing thing to see the energy, literally and figuratively, around that kind of new opportunity here. I'll tell you a quick story, a lot of questions coming in, but when we were there in that Maasai home and the television went in and the family was sitting on the couch, 3 generations, and we'd gone into the kitchen, couldn't stay in that kitchen. The heat and the smoke, literally couldn't breathe or see, and that's where they cook every day over biomass of various kinds, mostly wood. We went into the little den and turned on the television, and there was a couple things playing, and then on came a movie, and it was the sort of modern King Kong, where Kong is ripping apart something that looked like a T-Rex, and these little kids' eyes, and I didn't know how to say it's not real. It's not real, because a giraffe had just walked by, and things are big in Africa in the wild, and so the cultural experience there that I witnessed in real time was something that I had not anticipated and didn't know how to respond to through translation, particularly. But that's the kind of change that's coming. Let me keep looking here. That's the project. Is it more of a cost or availability of technology? It's both. You know, there's the technology is available certainly in most major cities in the world now. So be it distributed renewables, the massive dam project in Ethiopia, the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that's being built there. This is on a scale that's hard to fathom. The film, we tried to do it justice through the air flight and flyovers and looking across it, but you can't. It's 2 kilometers across in the main part of the dam, and then there's another 5-kilometer arcuate between 2 mountains to keep that water contained. When you're thinking about the vertical relief there, that wall, that containment wall, the dam, is about 2.5 Statues of Liberty tall. It's just phenomenal amount of concrete. It's big. It's 3 times bigger than our Hoover Dam in the United States. So you're seeing that with 16 400 megawatt turbines lined up, 6.4 gigawatts there. That's the equivalent, if you put a capacity factor on it, that's the equivalent of about 6 major nuclear reactors or 10 big coal power plants, or 10,000 wind turbines, 2 megawatt wind turbines with a 30%, 35% capacity factor. The generation out of that is equivalent to almost all the turbines in Texas. You've been across West Texas, there are turbines. So scale matters. And when you start to think about that facility, that dam on the Sudanese border, dammed on the Blue Nile that flows north, it merges with the White Nile and goes the main Nile north to Egypt, into Cairo. It has changed the conversation in North Africa. It's a tough conversation. The balance of power has changed. Initially, Cairo threatened to bomb the dam. That's our water. And the Ethiopians said, well, it's kind of in our country, the headwaters. And there's now conversations going on about how to make sure during flood times water's released, but it'll be more steady once it's filled. It'll power up about 50 million people in Ethiopia initially. That's half the population. And be able to sell some power to neighboring countries, revenue source. So when you think about this and the impacts that we tried to show of moving people and environmental as well, stream flow and sediment loads and things like that, changing the fish, fauna, and populations, they're very real. But powering 50 million people with a major project is a change in Ethiopia like nothing else could have done. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing across the world, and it's coming, and it's a good thing. You can't, I don't say good and bad, I try not to, but for the people that are finding access to and gaining access to these, it's a remarkable change. To be able to educate their children, to have access to medicines and vaccines, to not walk 3 miles for the water or cook indoors with wood, which is mostly gender discrimination. The women are doing that and sometimes don't even get to go to school when the men do. So in terms of the rights and freedom of women, migration issues that happen when your country is poor, when there's a leader that's not fair or is corrupt, or leadership at all levels that's corrupt, access to schools, you tend to migrate or immigrate. But as you build those communities and those economies, that changes. You start to get educated, and you can see some democratic and capital markets forming that help to elect leaders. And these are huge things. They're things that in our country, in the U.S., presuming most of the people here are from the U.S., it's not something we've grown up with. We simply can't understand it at the level that it exists in the world today. And it's not just a few people. It's really a big challenge. I did not see much on wind. We did that one. Power cost. Were there any countries, places you traveled that didn't make it in the film? Yes. We went to Quito, Ecuador, and filmed for a week there. We filmed some other things in Colombia. A big part of the Vietnam story we didn't tell in this film. It'll be told in our third film, if we can afford it, given what's going on. Keep those contributions coming. I'm putting money into, but it's tough right now. And boy, we have good plans. So that story is a neat one. We went into, in Vietnam, we went into a garment manufacturing facility, 300 sewing machines working simultaneously by people, sewing 100 leading name brands in the world. When your shirt says made in Vietnam, or your suit, or made in China, we're going to show you what that looks like. From bringing in the bolts of fabric, to pressing them, to cutting them, to the same person sewing cuffs all day long, collars all day long, buttons all day long, but it's a good job. There's daycare, there's healthcare, there's breaks, there's lunches. This is a big opportunity for many people. So there are lots of things that didn't make this film, but will be in our third film called Making the Switch. And that's true for the film Switch as well. On the website, we are creating 6 episodes, longer versions of these stories that show a lot of the things that we didn't show here, to keep it to a reasonable length. And they're really going to be cool. Plus some even shorter format modules. If you've been on the switchon.org website, check it out. 300 short format films from Switch. And we're going to be adding a lot more content from this film and other things that we're doing. Let's see. The ability to monetize is very important. You showed LPG, but no pipelines. The challenges of overhead power with cables that are tapped into, bonds that need to be bought prior to building a dam. Obviously, countries need systems and economies to pay for this. It looks like the microeconomies, SIMs, SIM cards, et cetera, work for the end user, but it needs mid-sized business to employ the capital. This is a wonderful point. I'd like to actually hire you to do research for us. Let me talk to that a little bit. Yeah. Initial systems in indigenous, where we went out to Maasai and Arwako, there are no systems. There are roads, power lines, pipelines, water. It's just not there. So that follows initially, but what you bring in is just the distributed, renewable, self-contained microgrids, whatever those look like. Now, as you start to connect those and scale those up in communities, and people start to hear about them and see their neighbors reading at night, and schools that are on, and vaccines in the freezers and things like this, you start to develop that community. And that's where the infrastructure starts to be needed. You'll see roads follow, wires follow to connect some of these microgrids and eventually grids. Pipelines, sure, the natural gas was coming in from India and Nepal on trucks and LPG trucks, and then being offloaded and put into canisters, and pipeline infrastructure would make that remarkably safer. This is a big discussion in the U.S. as well, pipelines, and there's concern about that. But trains and trucks and boats, which all have humans involved, and roads and tracks and waterways, pipelines have a much better documented safety record for moving energy. And moving energy is hard, no matter what form it's in. So pipeline infrastructure matters. It's going big discussion in Canada right now from moving things out of Alberta across to Vancouver. We're not moving it down through the central U.S. We might. Things are moving along there now. It's certainly better than across the Rocky Mountains, for sure. But that is a big challenge, that kind of infrastructure. So the systems have to come, governments, both at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, have to work on various scales of systems to deliver it. The great challenge here, and you saw it, but we didn't talk a lot about it, but you saw it and you felt it in Kibera, in the slum outside of Nairobi, Kenya, is corruption. Corruption at all levels. Kenya Power, which had brought that electricity in, had just removed its whole executive leadership team. Corruption at all levels. It's hard not to tear money out. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, it was sole sourced. This is a multi-billion-dollar project. And it was sole sourced to a dam builder, an Italian dam builder. I'm sure they're damn fine dam builders, but you might think there's something going on there. And so removing the corruption is going to have to happen with time, when it doesn't become part of what's seemingly acceptable in these cultures. And by the way, corruption exists everywhere. We have it. But in societies that are ruled by a stronger rule of law, then we can tend to find it out about it, ferret it out, and act on it for the most part. And there was more to that question. Economies to pay for it. And then I don't know if you caught it, but that dam project in Ethiopia, it wasn't initially favored by the country, but then when Cairo threatened, there was a united front, a month of salary from all the Ethiopians to build that project. And it's a bond. So they're confident in betting on their own future, but a month, and this is a country that's not wealthy. So picture that, take 8% of your annual salary and put it toward a major countrywide project. It's the kind of investment by the people in their own future that really stopped me and us and gave us pause to think about how important this is. The SIM cards were neat. You see that at all levels, whether it's a token, which you buy on your phone, a phone token, or physically. That credit only allows you to have a certain amount of electricity. So you might buy an hour, and then the hour comes to your home, and you use it. You might do something, listen to music. You might do something with a sewing machine. You might play a radio, perhaps turn on lights at night and do some reading. But it's what you can afford. So it's a stepwise process. And I think this leads me to a very important thought. And you might have caught this, but there's this challenge between giving fish, sorry to get kind of metaphorical here, and teaching how to fish. What seems to work, and it's not imperfect to be sure, but what seems to work is building micro markets that are in that community and that they create and then can maintain and grow. If that happens, then the sustainability of that is much greater. Whether it's an induction cooktop in Nepal in that little store for $55, which is a lot of money in Nepal, whether it's selling popsicles out of the freezer in Gunchukwa, whether it's creating street markets that are safer at night because lights are on and you can accelerate your productivity because of that ability to work at night safely, or again, something that you might have with electricity that you wouldn't have had otherwise from cooking and other kinds of things. These micro markets, these ones that are thought of, conceived of, and developed by the local community are what seem to be lasting. A story we heard but didn't film is in Bangladesh, hair salons are culturally very important. And now that they can be electrified, women run them. It's a safe gathering place. Again, hair is cultural. There's revenue. And it turns out a lot of the research is showing that women invest back in the community a lot more than the men. I won't say anything, but there you go. So your first electricity, you're going to build a hair salon? Yeah, that's what we're going to do. And that's okay. It's not for me to determine what matters. It's for the local community to do that. Some other questions. How are the governments responding or supporting these mid-sized companies with capital and or loans? The governments themselves are doing some of it, but again, as you would expect, I've been fortunate. I've been in about 65 countries in the world. And I'll tell you, in almost all those countries, China is present. They are bringing money through loans and investments. They are building infrastructure. We passed a massive facility on the way to Maasai country, to that little house that had barbed wire, razor wire, and electric fence. And it was a Chinese facility that was building the railway. China is buying resources in these countries of all kinds to both invest there, but also bring back to China. China is building more electric vehicles than the rest of the world combined. They need precious metals, rare earth elements, all kinds of metals to build batteries, manufacture, mine, manufacture, transport, and eventually put in landfill disposals. Across the board, you see that kind of investment coming from outside the country, and the country that doesn't have much money welcomes it because they don't have an ability to do that themselves. This is the kind of investment that's happening, and so far very peaceful. I'm sure there's challenges, but it's not done in a war occupation sense. It's done in an economic occupation sense, and those are very different. So I don't think the world should be naive about this rapid globalization that's going on in this realm. And it sits right on the back of energy and energy poverty. energy access, energy inequality, and how that all feeds into the economy. Some more coming in here. What will the third film be about? Well, we're concepting that now. The working title is Making the Switch. I speak a lot, and I do it all over the world. Not lately. Just had to cancel a bunch of talks all over the world. But what I talk about is, and have for a long time, is this convergence of energy, the economy, and the environment, and that overlap space. Call it the radical middle. Energy allows economies to grow. Healthy economies invest in the environment. It's a virtuous circle. Our third film is going to look at that. It's going to look at the opportunity in a very hopeful way of bringing energy, growing economies, lifting people up. Economies invest in the environment, and how that actually becomes a very positive thing for the world. It's scary to think about initially, because you can think a lot of energy, bad environment, and that's an A to C thought process. If you go, I'll hold my hands back here. If you go A, B, C, energy, the economy, the environment, which is what happens, okay, then it starts to make sense. In those 65 countries I've been in, without fail, the worst environmental impact is where it's poor. The dirtiest soil, the polluted water, the local air quality. We don't drink water out of a tap in poor countries. There's a reason for that. The cleanest environments in the world are where it's rich. Look at an air quality map. Whatever, whether it's 2.5 or whatever how you want it, where it's rich, the air is clean. We have wealth, we have scrubbers, we have environmental rules and regulations. We clean up the air. We drink water out of the tap. Our soil, there are exceptions. I'm not saying it's pristine. So it's not like where there are no humans. That's the cleanest, of course, of all. But barring that solution, which nobody advocates for, it's where it's wealthy. And that's the third film, is really going to examine how that plays out, whether it be climate change, the four pillars of the environment: atmospheric release, local air emissions, water, and land, and how energy plays and how the economies play. Going to be a tough film to make. There's going to be more conclusion. The first two films, we're showing you what's there and trying to do it in a completely nonpartisan way. The third film, we will also try our best to be nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean it won't be without some conclusions about what we think we understand in these systems. So look for it, Making the Switch, raising the money. We've got some other projects I'll mention real quickly. Halfway through is another film. It's not feature length. It's a museum film. We're very expensive 4-minute film for the Houston Museum of Science, Natural Science, and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and others. A film that will not have dialogue. It will be a story told very quickly of kids getting off a school bus in the more modern world, going home on their phones, into the house, glass of water, a sandwich, the cell phone, the TV, and everything just disappears. And not digital magic. This is the old school. We are filming time sequence stuff. Car goes by, gone. Bus gone. And I have a cameo as the school bus driver. That's my big breaking role. It'll tell the story when this all goes away and these kids are literally in a field with underwear on and their parents were with them. No child issues here. These are actors that we brought in. And then it starts to reappear. And what we'll show is the full cycle to get wood from the forest to build your home, from water to clean it up to your home, for all the full cycle of mining, manufacturing, electronics, what it takes to build that telephone, and the remote for your TV, and food, agriculture, the massive process of agriculture and harvesting, transporting, going into the processing plants, back to the grocery stores, transportation all along the way. You go to get it, comes packaging. It's just amazing. And so we are intending to show how energy matters in your life in 4 minutes without dialogue. That's going to be pretty powerful. And we've hired a director who's working on it. You might have heard Matthew McConaughey is teaching a class at the University of Texas. Well, the co-instructor, who does a lot of the instructing, is a guy named Scott Rice, and he makes television films, or television advertisements, high quality stuff. So he's a producer, director, along with Harry Lynch and then Switch and Arcos, and he's come together to do this. We're quite excited by it. That's mostly paid for, but this third film and other things we're working on. And then another big project that I'm quite excited about is high schools. There's a course taught in U.S. high schools called AP Environmental Sciences, APES. It turns out it's the most popular AP science class in the country. 200,000 students took it last year. 6,000 teachers nationwide of APES. Last year, I spoke to 300 of them in Cincinnati that were at one night. They invited me in. I don't know why. And they're grading all the essays. That led to us forming an advisory council of high school teachers. We Switch, are now creating energy curriculum for the 1 month of that year-long class. They are helping us to write it. It's going to access our video network. We've written a platform to serve that, so that the films are shown with pop-up quiz questions, progress. You can flip the classroom at night. It's awesome. We hope to get as the digital textbook for that month into the hands of 6,000 teachers and 200,000 kids every year. This is amazing. And in COVID time, they've all gone home. So we've now accelerated that. We're going to deliver 2 of those modules in just over a week to those teachers. One on renewable energy, one on non-renewable energy. And these are the meaty parts, because APES decided that it couldn't teach everything, and the APES collective cut out part of the curriculum. They kept all the energy in. So energy is now a third of that class this year, and Switch is going to help heavily supplement that curriculum, and the teachers are thrilled because they don't have these materials. So again, your companies and your friends, when you put money into us, this is where it's going. It's literally hitting K through 12, universities, museums and the public, and then of course corporate and other kinds of screenings. We need you. You know, we can't stop this midstream. Boy, lots more coming in. Let's see. Any ways that GEOs in Dallas can help with some of your future projects? Also, can you use help grad students at the Jackson School? Sure. Let me tell you something right now you can do. I decided about 6 months ago to take all of my PowerPoint slides that I spend a lot of time on. They're animated and layered. The references are there. The data are there. I keep them pretty current. And I've made those available on the switchon.org site. They're under presentations. I did it as 20 slide packs so far. We're going to make a few more. So 3 to 5 slides, up to 10 slides per pack. You know, over 100 animated PowerPoint slides. And then I recorded an MP4 voice under these of me saying what I would say. So you can download the actual PowerPoint, play the little clip and hear what I would say, and you can mix and match these slides any way you want to. And I am going to give those listening an assignment. Go out to your schools, your civic groups, your churches, your clubs, and speak. Put 10 slides together. Talk to your friends about energy. You have to do this. If you don't, I promise you others are. There are other people, plenty, speaking about energy passionately, and sometimes in a fairly partisan way. Not with bad intentions. Let's give everybody good intentions, but in a fairly partisan way, such that the information is only partial. And I can tell you, when I speak to students, and my last talk was up at Texas Tech just recently. They watched the film. I did a campus-wide. I was in a couple law classes. In fact, one of the people sponsoring this, his nephew goes there to tech, and I met him. I promise you, when they hear my talks, there's a mix of confusion and a little angst. And then mostly it's, why haven't we heard this? Where has this been? Why aren't we seeing all this information out there, even in our own university? Because remarkably, it won't surprise you, even faculty have our own biases, and we teach to those what we're comfortable teaching. We've got to broaden this. We've got to get the pros and cons, the critical thinking. What are the upsides and downsides, the pros and cons of each of these options? I'll give you a very real example of this. On an AP Environmental Science essay, or in a true-false question, you might see something like, what are the environmental positives of offshore wind? And the essay question is to have you tell the positive aspects of offshore wind. There's plenty of them. It doesn't say, what are the environmental downsides to offshore wind? And there are plenty of those too. And then another question might say, what are the environmental impacts of tar sands? Not oil sands, tar sands. Not the pros and cons, the impacts. So the questions in themselves lead toward a set of answers that cause one to think, these are good and these are bad. That is bias. And I can tell you, if you're my age, your kids have come through a system, I don't care where you live, that is sharing that kind of information about energy. Again, not bad intentions, it's what's available. We have to get out and start to speak about this. So that's one thing you can do in your communities right now. Graduate students at the Jackson School, to some level, yes, the Jackson School does a few of these things. Bureau of Economic Geology is in some of this. I've had some, a graduate student or two working on these kinds of projects. So it's possible. It's not prevalent. Mostly the science degrees are not into the big global combination of economics and environment, but there are components of it that certainly can be. And other colleges as well. So policy schools, business schools, engineering schools, legal, etc., are all components of this. Takes a little bit of experience to know what's real. So maybe right out of undergrad, it'd be a little tough to play in these areas, but certainly possible. Another question, and we've got just a few more minutes here. Do you think it would be more beneficial for countries to start with renewable energy, given all the health and environmental issues with non-renewable energy? It depends. I think if you don't have anything, by definition, you're going to be using renewables, again, because you don't have much infrastructure. Now, renewables are not without their own environmental impacts. I know we hear clean, dirty, good, bad, etc., which is just not the case. If you're mining the metals and the copper to build very large, simple machines called wind turbines, it takes a lot of stuff to do that. And then that has to be stored somewhere, usually batteries or other kinds of ways to store energy. There are a variety of them. And then it has to be moved on big power lines. We know this in Texas. We have 345 kV massive power line systems. And then there's energy loss, and then it gets consumed. And then those batteries and those turbines wear out. It's already happening. We cut these big turbine blades up into thirds and we bury them in landfill. They're not toxic, the turbine blades, but some of the metals and elements in solar panels are. And certainly there are a lot of toxic gases that come off of batteries when you bury them, like a lot, in the more than tens up to 100. So as we start to electrify the vehicle fleet, massive set of challenges. Just the scale of the batteries there, it's 100 to 1,000 fold the few billion batteries that exist for cell phones and other things today, because there are thousands of batteries per vehicle, lithium-ion batteries. So, land, manufacturing, mining, all go up, land use. There are nature impacts. Certainly on the emissions side, lower. at the source. So oil and gas, they have all these challenges too. You got to manufacture the things, you got to drill and then move and refine, and then we combust it. So giant set of challenges in oil and gas, coal the same, mining, combustion, etc. Nuclear mining, although it's a much more energy intense element, uranium and thorium and other radioactive elements have a lot of energy in them. So less mining, very dense energy. The facilities themselves are extremely efficient, and the only thing that comes out is steam. Now you have to manage the radioactive waste. But nuclear itself, climate change is a big issue, then it's remarkably clean in an atmospheric sense. But I've just described some challenges, nothing without. The bigger issue to me, though, and I go back to where I began, is as you go from distributed renewable and start to scale, you have to have things that are always on. We don't like our lights off. We don't like our hospitals going off intermittently. We have critical infrastructure. We want to read. The air conditioning and the heating, the renewables don't time to that always, etc. So things that can be always on matter, and they can merge and dovetail in this integrated system. What that builds, though, at the end of the day, is a healthy economy, and it's that economy that invests in the environment. Back to where we started. Cleanest environments in the world, where there's wealth. Worst, where it's poor. So I think this concept that we can do all of one or all of the other is inaccurate. Some of both matter, and we can clean them up. So rather than focus so much on a fuel, we focus on the emissions themselves. What are the environmental impacts of these things, and how do we clean those up? And I'll give you a quick analogy. There's another kind of energy. It's called food, and it uses water a lot. It uses fertilizers. It has runoff into streams. It depletes soils. And so we're not going to end food. Last time I checked, we're going to clean up the processes that growing food for 7.6 billion people require. Same with energy. Let's clean it up, and it can be done, but it takes energy to clean energy. And there's a lot of neat things out there too. Big scale geothermal could be coming and stuff we haven't talked about yet, but it's coming. Great talk. Thank you for being adaptable. I'm not writing this. Thanks for being adaptable in your presentation to the Dallas Geophysical Society. Stay healthy, Scott. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the film. Please share it. These virtual screening rooms, we're going to, away from the physical screenings, anybody can host a virtual screening room. A school, a church, a civic group, a book club, your neighborhood, your family. Anybody can host a virtual screening room. Contact us. Sophie is online listening, and Marissa's probably online listening. We'll set you up with a virtual screening room. It's free. Let's go out there and get educated about energy. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate, Margot, particularly your patience in doing all this. I know it's been a long road. We'll do another one at the Angelica as soon as this little virus thing gets settled out. Take care, everybody, and with energy.